One was an incident involving a planned assault of an African American inmate that the defendant was disciplined for. And that assault, based on my understanding of the records, was motivated because the African American inmate had been arrested and convicted for murdering a white female. And that the defendant reportedly said, again, based on the records, that they felt that assaulting this person would be righteous. And that's relevant for a few different reasons. One of the central kind of themes that's most salient for white supremacists is this idea of black on white crime, and in particular that white females are victimized by black males. And they see this as they emphasize this issue, pretty much consistently throughout their propaganda. The fact that the defendant described it in terms of righteous is also very consistent with how white supremacists view violent attacks. Approximately a year later, a request that the defendant made for Christian identity literature was ultimately denied by the facility. Christian identity is a major kind of religious orientation that exists among white supremacists. In a nutshell, it's pretty convoluted, but it does use the King James Version of the Bible, but it radically reinterprets it from a white supremacist point of view.
Is there any connection, based on your research, between free speech and the white nationalist movement?
Yes, sir. When the American Nazi Party marched in a famous case that ultimately went to the courts and allowed them to march in Skokie, Illinois, in a largely Jewish American neighborhood, that was done under the banner of free speech. White supremacists have for quite a while used this free speech issue as an effort to try and appeal to a broader kind of swath of the population by using something that I think most, if not all, Americans cherish, right? The idea of free speech. It's a cornerstone of our democracy. So of course that's an appealing issue to rally around. And white supremacists, when you look at them in terms of their efforts to create propaganda and use that propaganda to influence people, can be quite sophisticated in identifying issues like this. And this is not uncommon to see them be able to identify issues that they think will be effective as propaganda tools. When we look at explicit bias that we talked about as being consistent with white supremacist beliefs, anti-black racism, anti-Semitism, a number of expressions that are very clear indicators of high levels of both of those things in his statements. Anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, also indicators there, maybe not quite as strong as the anti-black and anti-Semitic expressions, but certainly there. We see the in-group identification and the expressions there, in particular the kind of focus on Viking history, and then probably in some ways most importantly, the trappings of white supremacists in terms of the promotion of Tim McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing, a very important figure within the white supremacist movement and a very important event within the white supremacist movement. We see the references to balkanization of Aryans, Aryan term itself, hailed victory, again, expressing trappings of white supremacists that are very common in that world. So based on the high level of explicit bias that's quite clear, along with the trappings in the in-group identification, this all seems to suggest things that are very consistent with white supremacist beliefs.